The first emperor of China's Qin dynasty died in 210 BCE, and China's first empire started to unravel almost immediately. A brutal succession struggle erupted among Qin courtiers and imperial princes. While palace intrigues raged, a military officer named Chen Sheng organized a short-lived but intense rebellion against the self-destructing Qin. Then came Shang Yu, a general from the reconstituted state of Chu, a state that Qin had conquered less than a generation before. In 207, Shang Yu's Chu armies shattered the Qin army at the Battle of Julu in present-day Hebei province. But it was Liu Bang, peasant and common soldier from what is now Jiangsu province, who would ultimately prevail. Liu Bang had joined Shang Yu's forces and rapidly rose through the ranks. It was General Liu Bang who accepted the surrender of the last Qin emperor. Shang Yu named Liu Bang King of Han, a remote fiefdom. The name Han derives from the Han River located in the region. Today, more than 90% of China's people are of Han ethnicity, an ethnicity that derives its name from the long-lived dynasty that Liu Bang created. In 202 BCE, Liu finally defeated his former ally, Shang Yu, and became Han Gaozu, meaning something like Supreme Ancestral Emperor of the Han. This marks the beginning of China's second imperial dynasty, the Han, which endured until 220 CE. Today I'll be talking about the Western Han. Its dates are 206 BCE to 9 CE. Western because the capital was in the west at Chang'an. The Eastern Han would rule from the eastern city of Luoyang from 25 to 220 CE. That's a topic for another day. Liu Bang, or Emperor Gaozu, was from the east, near modern Shanghai. But he chose to locate his capital in the Wei River region, the heartland of the short-lived Qin dynasty, founded in 221, and which Liu Bang had had a hand in overthrowing in 206. The emperor named his magnificent new capital Chang'an, meaning perpetual peace. The choice was significant. In the eyes of many, the political unification of the entire Chinese cultural sphere under the Qin had been an aberration. Many felt that the natural political order was decentralized and multipolar, a balance of power between independent Chinese kingdoms. Liu Bang resisted decentralization and adopted many of the institutions of his Qin predecessors. But at the same time, he tried to accommodate other views of the ideal political order. And this put the Han founder on the horns of several dilemmas. Liu Bang had taken the title of emperor, a Qin convention, located his capital in the Qin heartland, and adopted the Qin system of using military governors to rule the western half of his empire. But in the east, he set up his relatives and allies as hereditary kings to rule on his behalf. It was a hybrid of Qin centralization in the west and pre-Qin feudalism in the east. Gradually, the de facto and de jure power of the hereditary kings was reduced and the reach of the central government was extended. But the great aristocratic clans that remained retained power and influence as a complement, a counterweight to the Han emperor. So first off today, I want to look at the lives and the afterlives of the Han nobility. Numerous tombs from the Western Han have been unearthed in recent decades, providing us with an astonishingly clear window into the daily lives of the Han nobility. We get a sense of their wealth and power and also learn how they lived, what they believed, and how they spent their leisure time. One reason why these tombs are so helpful for understanding the lives of these people derives from the way ancient Chinese understood the human soul. Traditional belief had it that the soul had two parts, the Hun and the Po. The Hun, or cloud soul, is the ethereal portion, that travel to heaven after death. The Po, or the white soul, was the corporeal part. It remained on earth with the body. At a funeral, the Hun gets a nice send-off, but the Po needs to be provided for with grave goods, daily necessities for the afterlife. And the better the life you lived, the more elaborate your necessities for the afterlife needed to be. That's why the artifacts buried with the Han nobility give us a really good idea of how they lived and some idea of the lives of the people who worked for them. Han tombs, especially those of the wealthy, were also decorated with paintings, tapestries, and clay models of dwellings, all offering images of daily life in the 2nd and 1st centuries BCE. And Han tombs, as preparation for the afterlife, mirrored the homes of the living. It's Han architecture in miniature. Some of the best preserved of these tombs are found at Mawangdui, near Changsha in Hunan province. 3 tombs in particular bear mention. The tomb of the Marquis of Dai, that of his wife Xinjue, commonly known as Lady Dai, and another belonging to their son. The Marquis was the prime minister to the king of the state of Chu, the ruler of one of those semi-autonomous kingdoms set up by the Han founder. That puts the Marquis around the 3rd rung of Han nobility. But his wife's tomb is what really gives us an idea of the lavish lives and rich diet the Han nobility enjoyed. Lady Dai's Po, her corporeal soul, was outfitted in high style. In her tomb were more than 1,400 artifacts, hundreds of pieces of lacquerware, a full lacquer dining service, and an elaborate, intricate toiletry case with nested boxes and vials containing her makeup and her fragrances. There were green-glazed earthenware replicas of homes, farms, stoves, farm implements, all sorts of fascinating things. There were carved wooden replicas of servants and musicians and clay versions of coins and bullion. The lady herself was wrapped in 20 of her finest silk garments and cocooned within 4 nested lacquered coffins. Laid atop the outer coffin was a magnificent T-shaped silk banner that had been carried in her funeral procession. It depicts the voyage of the twin souls, the Hun and the Po, through life and into the afterlife. The whole thing, all of those nested coffins, are encased in charcoal and white clay. This was an ingenious process that protected the lady so well that when she was unearthed in the early 1970s, her skin was still supple. Her limbs bent, and there was blood in her veins. You can still see her in all her creepy glory at the Hunan Provincial Museum. In other tombs, the bodies were encased in jade suits. These were thought mistakenly to preserve the flesh indefinitely. Remember, the Po resides in the physical body, so if you can preserve it, that's good. The Lady Dai had no jade suit. Instead, the people who buried her achieved, largely by accident, the ancient world's greatest feat of post-mortem preservation. To me, the coolest thing about Lady Dai's tomb is the food. Within the lacquerware was a gastronomic treasure trove that would scramble the palate of today's most fanatic foodie. There was venison, rabbit, suckling pig, mutton, dog, and wild boar, duck, goose, pheasant, squab, quail, and sparrow's eggs. We know the menu because tomb contents were meticulously inventoried for the benefit of bureaucrats in the afterlife. These main courses were prepared in intriguing variety: braised, fried, boiled, roasted, and poached. With them were side dishes of root vegetables, soybeans, rice, wheat, and millet. There were fruits of the tree and the vine, juice and liquor, and all manner of onions, garlic, herbs, spices, pickles, and sauces, all for added zest. From Lady Dai's tomb, it's easy to imagine what a banquet of nobles in the state of Chu must have been like. Long lines of fine chariots queuing up to unload bejeweled and silk-robed passengers at the front gate of the huge 2-story Dai mansion, which rivaled the imperial palaces in Chang'an. Lady Di would prepare for her guests in her luxurious personal apartments, located at the back of the house, where servants applied her makeup and positioned a hairpiece to discreetly cover a bald spot, and then complete her elaborate coiffure. Her guests would be seated at long, low tables in a brightly lit main hall and be attended by dozens, maybe hundreds of servants. The guest conversations would range from imperial politics to the latest fads in pharmacopoeia and longevity treatments, to the quality of the year's persimmon crop. All the while, musicians, dancers, acrobats, and storytellers would entertain throughout the lavishly appointed courtyard. Food was a big part of Lady Di's personal life. Her autopsy revealed that she was a moderately obese woman in her late 50s, plagued by gallstones, heart disease, and lethally clogged arteries. Now, while lavish feasts and exotic foods were important to the Han nobility and a significant marker of noble status, food was also a critical component of Chinese pharmacopoeia. We know this from the treasure trove of medical texts unearthed from the tomb of Lady Di's son. Now, by comparison, the 50 million or so peasants who made up 90% of the Han population, well, they led daily lives nothing like those of Lady Di and her party guests. The nobility had been critical to Liu Bang's victory in the post-Qin civil wars and in his early attempts to consolidate his new dynasty. But they also represented a challenge. They created alternative centers of political and military power and set up a powerful tension between the imperial center and the nobility of the regions. Balancing that tension was essential to dynastic durability. The success of the Han, and of all durable Chinese dynasties, was charting a course between two poles. At one end was the ideological and institutional extremism of the Qin dynasty, a kind of amoral, big government, might makes right view of politics, which appealed to activist emperors. The other end appealed to the regional elites. It favored small government and a moral ethos inspired by the 6th century BCE philosopher Confucius. The Qin model, sometimes called legalism, was obviously attractive to someone trying to unify China. But the rapid implosion of the Qin gave credence to the Confucian small government approach. As we're about to see, the ways that this tension was managed, was balanced, had a significant impact on how a dynasty's subjects lived their daily lives. Now, there's contradictory evidence about the first Han emperor's views of the teachings of Confucius. Later official histories tell us he was sympathetic, that he patronized Confucian scholarships and set up temples to the sage across the empire. Other sources portray Gaozu as a skeptic. It shouldn't surprise us then that one of Gaozu's successors, Han Wudi, that is Emperor Wu, would endorse a Confucian curriculum for the dynasty's civil service exams, and at the same time hew closely to the Qin model in both his domestic and foreign policies. In other words, early Han emperors were trying to have it both ways. And they favored a brand of Confucianism called Imperial Confucianism. It involved a unified, almost orthodox curriculum for the exams, an emphasis on public service, a respect for authority, especially imperial authority. But by endorsing Confucianism, emperors had also introduced a potential check on their authority. In Confucianism, the most important relationship was the bond between father and son. Confucius expected sons to respect their fathers. This is xiao, or filial piety. That's appealing to an emperor as the symbolic father of the people. He wants the respect of the people. But in Confucianism, the father was also expected to be benevolent to his children. Then there were the civil service exams. These tested would-be officials on their understanding of Confucianism. Most officials earn their positions based on their aristocratic pedigree, but the exams open the door for a few small government Confucians to enter the corridors of power. Han tombs reveal the importance of scholarship to the Han elite. In the tomb of Lady Dai's son are dozens of books covering a range of topics from astronomy to gastronomy to divination. Studying the Confucian classics gave even a commoner a chance to attend the Imperial University and to compete in the imperial examinations and thereby rise in status. An extreme example of such upward mobility was the pig breeder Gongsun Hong, who at age 40 dedicated himself to studying the Confucian classics. In his elder years, Gongsun Hong enjoyed the favor of the emperor and eventually rose to the rank of imperial chancellor. So a modest meritocracy was a small counterweight to the hereditary nobility. As to the big government versus small government contest, in the Western Han period, it was mostly the advocates of centralization, of big government, that had the upper hand. But early Han emperors understood that they had to ratchet back the inclination to rule exactly like the Qin dynasty had done. They also had to work out the tension between the civilian aspects of governance, called wen, and the need to maintain a robust military, called wu. Liu Bang tried to quickly demobilize and disband his armies after coming to power in 206 BCE. But strategic challenges, foreign and domestic, meant that the military would remain large and politically powerful throughout the Han period, though not quite on the scale or pervasiveness as the highly militarized Qin. The Han also moderated the strict laws and nasty punishments, legalism, that were the hallmark of the Qin. Clearly written laws that were impartially adjudicated were signs of good governance and imperial legitimacy across the board. But if the legal system was too draconian, it could threaten the longevity of a ruling house. Case in point, Liu Bang himself had rebelled against the Qin rather than face the death penalty for allowing some prisoners under his watch to escape. So the Han founder knew firsthand that overly strict laws could be the catalyst for rebellion. But for all that, the Han legal system remained much the same as that of the Qin. In the early Han, we also see a powerful tension play out between loyalty to one's own lineage, that's one's own clan, one's bloodline, and loyalty to the emperor. This is captured dramatically in Liu Bang's own family. Decades before he became emperor, Liu Bang had married a smart and capable woman by the name of Lu Zhi. Family names come first in China. Liu Bang's family name is Liu, and Lu Zhi's lineage is Lu. But Chinese women keep their family name after marriage. This isn't a mark of independence or proto-women's lib. It's to indicate that even after marriage, a wife is not fully part of her husband's family. Her children, yes, but her, not completely. Lu Zhi stood by Liu Bang through trying times. And when he took the throne, she became empress, and their son, Liu Ying, became heir apparent. During the early days of the dynasty, Lu Zhi and her son were entrusted with managing much of the civil administration, while Liu Bang was consolidating his military conquests. The empress even outmaneuvered the emperor when he seemed bent on replacing Liu Ying as heir apparent. He wanted to replace him with the son of one of his concubines. Lu Zhi ultimately had that concubine done away with. After Liu Ying became emperor in 195 BCE, his mother became what's called Empress Dowager. And she grew even more powerful. She forced her son to marry his cousin on his mother's side, emphasizing the Lu family over that of the Liu. Lu Zhi was the power behind the throne for 15 years. But when she died, the Lu lineage was forced out, and the Liu clan reasserted itself with another son of Liu Bang by one of his consorts. His name was Liu Heng, and he became Emperor 1 in 180 BCE. The ascension of Emperor 1 marks the beginning of Imperial China's first golden age, which lasted from 180 to the death of Emperor 1's grandson, the Emperor Wu, in 87 BCE. A century of relative stability during which many essential institutions of Imperial China were established. Among the notable achievements was the institution of the civil service exams that remained one of, if not the primary means of staffing the imperial bureaucracy right up until the 20th century. China's legal code and tax system were also modified and codified. On the frontiers, Emperor 1 and his son, Emperor Jing, tackled the security threat posed by a powerful confederation of nomadic tribes known as the Xiongnu. You might know them as the Huns. They dealt with them and stabilized those borders through an intriguing combination of carrots and sticks. The sticks were the threat of military reprisals. The carrots were a policy known as the Heqin, or marriage treaties, under which Han princesses and palace women were married off to Xiongnu chieftains in exchange for peace and obedience. The era was not, however, without its problems. One major crisis is known as the Rebellion of the Seven States. As you'll recall, the first emperor of the Han Gaozu, had set up his relatives and allies as hereditary kings to rule on his behalf in the eastern half of the empire. These were the Seven States. But in 154 BCE, Emperor Jing tried to curtail the power of these semi-autonomous kingdoms. The king of Chu, the home state of Lady Dai and her husband, joined the rebellion. The defeat of the Seven Kings substantially enhanced the power of the Han Emperor. That internal consolidation also set the stage for the expansionist policies of the Emperor Wu, otherwise known as Han Wudi. Wudi is a much disputed figure in Chinese history. The Shiji, the records of the grand historian, portray him as little more than an overreaching tyrant. Though the author might have been a little biased because Wudi had him castrated. But what we can say about Emperor Wu was that he wanted secure borders and a stable home front. Internally, he sought to limit the power of the feudal aristocracy. He also wanted to crush the Xiongnu. In Han Wudi's eyes, what was standing in the way of both objectives was the empire's merchant class. The Han government had always been suspicious of merchants and somewhat insecure about them as well because the dynasty was dependent on moneylenders. We know, too, that the wealthiest merchants matched and even exceeded the lifestyles of the nobility. Han sumptuary laws, that is, laws that defined the material culture of the classes, or material culture allowed to the various classes, well, those prohibited merchants from copying the hairstyles, the clothing, and the home designs of the nobility and the imperial clan. But apparently these laws had little effect. A fiery critic of merchant excess named Cao Cuo wrote the following words: "By means of their wealth, they associate with kings and marquises. Their power surpasses that of officials. They ride in well-built carriages and drive fat horses. They wear silks on their feet and trail silks behind them." Well, legally, silk was only allowed to be worn by the nobility. The fact that wealthy merchants could dress and act like this in the heart of the imperial capital must have been truly galling to an aristocrat like Cao Cuo. Not all Han merchants were wealthy. Out on the imperial highways and byways, we see much less prosperous merchants keeping the mundane end of the Han commercial economy chugging along. Nonetheless, the wealthiest and most powerful businessmen controlled crucial and incredibly labor and capital-intensive industries. These were mining, iron, and salt. Iron was indispensable to agriculture and to warfare alike. And salt, of course, is essential for life. Furthermore, thousands of Han subjects were more beholden to their merchant employers and their suppliers than they were to the emperor himself. So Han Wudi had domestic problems, and beyond the empire's borders, he was dissatisfied with earlier diplomatic efforts. He was concerned with the chronic threat from the Xiongnu. So in 133, he scrapped the old marriage alliance policy, the Heqian, and adopted a much more muscular military approach to deal with the Xiongnu. For about a decade, the emperor financed his military offensives with the treasure amassed by his frugal father and grandfather. And within a decade, Han armies had pushed deep into Central Asia. Flush with success, Wudi then launched additional campaigns into northern Korea, northern Vietnam, and into areas that are now southwest China. But once his war chest was exhausted, Wudi turned to new potential sources of revenue. In 117 BCE, he decreed that salt and iron would be government monopolies. It wasn't a direct takeover of day-to-day operations. Instead, the state auctioned off contracts for the production and distribution of salt and finished iron goods, auctioned off to the highest bidders. In the near term, the extra revenue that this brought in, these monopolies, re-energized Han Wudi's frontier wars. They made a success out of Wudi's campaign of breaking the power of some of the empire's most dangerous foes, especially the Xiongnu. But such campaigns were expensive and protracted, as was the cost of maintaining alliances and military garrisons across such a breadth of newly conquered territory. And it was also expensive to relocate large populations of Chinese to settle these newly conquered lands. Conversely, the resettlement of non-Chinese within the Han boundaries had created all manner of additional financial and security challenges. So for all of his glorious achievements, Han Wudi's later years would be marked by financial distress, popular unrest, and bizarre palace intrigues. In many ways, these sounded the end of the golden age of the Western Han. Less than a decade after Han Wudi's death in 87 BCE, a senior minister and former merchant by the name of Sang Hongyang is said to have called for a debate on Wudi's foreign and domestic policies, a debate held at the court of his son, Emperor Zhao. The debate is recorded in a text known as the Discourses on Salt and Iron. Sang, having been part of the imperial takeover of the industries, defends the monopolies on strategic grounds. He says the empire needed to control the production and distribution of essential commodities. Government control prevented great power and wealth from falling into the hands of factions and corrupt merchants and officials, he said. The anti-monopoly small government Confucians countered that the government's iron implements were poorly made and that they ill-served peasant farmers. They said the empire and its subjects would be better off if small smithies could get back into making iron tools, and that support of industrial monopolies and the foreign adventures they paid for added to the suffering of the common people. The Confucians didn't win this debate, but it sizes up the two sides' emerging positions very nicely. And it's remarkable to see the educated elite pushing back against the emperor and pushing back against his chancellor, Sang Hongyang. So while the early Han emperors succeeded at curtailing the power of the hereditary nobility and extending the dynasty at the expense of China's foreign foes, the imperial bureaucracy and the empire's official endorsement of Confucianism also facilitated the growth of a new kind of Chinese elite. This was a scholar class that was simultaneously tied to the imperial apparatus through the examination systems and through bureaucratic service. But it was also committed to limiting the reach and preventing the overreach of the emperor and his ministers. These were major historical achievements.